Did you know that Crimea has been juggled between owners ever since it ceased to be a Greek territory in 1774? Powers like Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia have constantly regarded it as a place of strategic importance and aim to make it a permanent part of their territories. The ongoing Russian-Ukrainian War is the current conflict for which Crimea stands to be a major piece. The roots of the war's tensions date back to 1991, when Ukraine was granted independence from the Soviet Union. As we enter the second year of the new Russian invasion of Ukrainian territory, both countries have clarified their stance and intentions. On the 24th of February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin sent 200,000 troops to Ukraine in an attempt to capture Kiev and compel a surrender to completely absorb Ukraine into Russia. From the get-go, Putin's label of a special military operation was misleading. Putin's official statement centered around a preposterous claim that the war was a way to protect people from 8 years of Ukrainian bullying and genocide, and they would take over Ukraine without force. If you were watching the news, you surely heard the words demilitarize and denazify being included. A discussion on the background of such a notion would warrant another video on its own. This proved to be purely propaganda and believed by no one living outside the Russian borders. In reality, Putin's main motives were that 1. Russia felt threatened by Ukraine's desire to join NATO, a military alliance between several European and North American states. As Putin has been growing contempt for and distancing Russia from Western nations for many years now, the thought of NATO expanding to his borders surely scared him. And 2. Putin has never recognized Ukraine as an independent country and people. He sees them as Russian, and will stop at nothing in order to force a Russian future and life upon them. So, the Russian president's intentions were crystal clear. His aim was to occupy Ukraine by force and make it a part of Russian territory. At the start of the war, the world was left stunned. After all, there was no way a small country like Ukraine would be able to defend against Russia, a supposed superpower, right? Fast forward to present day, and the war has escalated beyond expectations. Following the atrocities Russian troops committed against Ukrainian civilians across the suburbs of Kiev, in Bucha and Izium earlier in the war, this only further cemented Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's decision. He will not let Russia and Putin steal 1 inch of soil in Ukraine and will not rest until Ukraine returns to its prior state, including Crimea. To quote Zelensky's now famous words, "Everything began with Crimea and everything will end with Crimea." It is clear that Ukraine has no plans to concede. Will Crimea become the trophy that returns to Ukraine, or will Russia continue to enjoy a non-contested hold over this region? While it's too early to give a decisive answer, we can explore both sides of the debate. The ongoing Russian-Ukrainian War was originally instigated in 2014, when Russia illegally took Crimea from Ukrainian control. When asked about the justification, Russian President Vladimir Putin quickly responded that the land is inherently Russian due to the baptism of Saint Vladimir having taken place here. Saint Vladimir was the ancient ruler of this region, which from 980 to 1015 was called Kievan Rus. Several modern countries, including Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, have laid claims on Kievan Rus, stressing it as their cultural ancestor. It has also inspired the names of Belarus and Russia. But the claim about Saint Vladimir getting baptized in Crimea was proven false, with historical records hinting towards Crimea being a Greek territory during his reign. With the ongoing Russian invasion into Ukraine and the subsequent capture of several cities in the eastern Donbass region, the issue of Crimea has yet again become a focal point. Ukraine is adamant about regaining all of its lost territories, with Crimea being the ultimate and final goal. Let's look a bit more into why Crimea is so hotly contested. On February the 27th, 1954, the president of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, transferred control of Crimea to the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. The reason published in the official newspaper of the Communist Party, Pravda, was that Crimea and Ukraine had close economic ties and were near to each other in terms of geographical proximity. While this might not have been the real reason, it was widely accepted by the world. But there was a quiet disharmony between the Soviets, leading to murmurs that Khrushchev was partial towards Ukraine, given that that was his birthplace. When the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, Crimea, by extension, automatically went to the Ukrainians until it was captured by Russian troops in 2014. That said, why is Russia still so dead set on maintaining control of Crimea? The primary reason is the geographical location of Crimea. It is strategically located almost entirely within the Black Sea, with the Sea of Azov at the other end. This makes the country an economic hub, with an estimated trade capacity of $400 million every year. Plus, it is a goldmine for natural resources like minerals, metals, oil, and natural gas. Further research also says that Crimea is on its way to becoming a significant corridor for energy transfer within Europe. However, the primary reason for Russian annexation is Sevastopol, an important port where the Russian naval fleet has been stationed, with approximately 15,000 troops since 1997. It marks a strategic position for Russia on the southern seas, since its access to large seas is limited by its mainland's geographical location. Previously, Sevastopol has served as a crucial base for the Russian naval fleet to command a powerful position in its 2008 invasion of Georgia, as well as its continuous collaboration with Vietnam, Syria, and Venezuela. During the initial week of April 2023, the Ukrainian president's official spokesperson, Tamila Tasheva, made a startling statement for the world to hear. Ukraine will choose the way to bring Crimea back, using political and military means. She further added that the country was prepared to give Russia a chance to surrender Crimea peacefully and avoid thousands of unnecessary civilian casualties. If Russia were to lose control over Crimea entirely, its status as a major power on the world map would become greatly subdued. So, just like there's a 0% chance Zelensky would surrender Kiev, we can say the chances are the same that the Kremlin negotiates Crimea back to Ukraine. Even in the very early days of the conflict, the Kremlin claimed it will not have any communications about the future of the Crimean Peninsula. The Ukrainians are currently working hard to retake nearby Kherson and Mariupol, and once they do, the likelihood of an offensive into Crimea will become greater. When pondering the possible outcome of Russia keeping control of Crimea following the end of this war, it is important to understand that modern Crimea is a diverse region with different ethnicities. However, the original inhabitants of this land were the Tatars, a Turkish ethnic group. But the Tatars have been driven away from their homeland in large numbers following World War II, when Crimea fell under the jurisdiction of Joseph Stalin. In 1992, Crimea was officially granted autonomy and independence within the Ukrainian state. This status is guaranteed in the Constitution of Ukraine. The Tatars returned in large numbers, but comprise only a small portion of the total Crimean population, just 12% of its 2.4 million residents. Ethnic Russians comprise a solid majority, though this does not mean that they are in favor of joining Russia. Establishing a Crimean identity has been understandably ambiguous and will be a key part of its future development. An essential part of Russia's control over Crimea has been the 2018 construction of the longest bridge in Europe, the Kerch Bridge. It was built to physically connect mainland Russia to Crimea, as it provides an effective way for the Kremlin to get food and supplies to not only the civilian population, but also the naval base in Sevastopol. It has been vital for the Russian war effort in Ukraine, and a symbol of Putin's efforts to maintain Crimea as a Russian territory. Not long into the current war, on May 8, 2022, a major portion of the bridge was damaged from an explosion caused by a bomb present in a truck traveling on the bridge. This was likely a big move by the Ukrainian forces to begin the long road of shaking the Russian foundation in Crimea. In 2023, the Kerch Bridge entered the spotlight again, when it was used by thousands of Russians to flee Crimea, fearing a massive Ukrainian counterattack. Native Crimeans have also been displaced in large numbers, and their homes occupied by Russian forces. By the end of this war, if Russia is successful in maintaining control of Crimea, it would reassert Russian dominance over Eastern Europe and send a profound message to the rest of the world that there are no consequences to their illegal captures and annexations. There are two ways in which Russian control can disappear from the peninsula. Either Ukraine uses force to take back Crimea, or through negotiations, gets the Kremlin to agree to hand over control under certain conditions. For either to be possible, Ukraine must first conquer the ongoing huge task of breaking the so-called land bridge that Russia has established in southeastern Ukraine. Since the larger war began last year, Putin has taken control of this territory that connects Crimea to Russia, including the port city of Mariupol, a major nuclear plant near the city of Zaporizhia, and much of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. Regardless of the method, one thing is certain. Ukraine has sworn to reinstate the Crimean population displaced by the Russian troops in 2014 and return them to their homes by expelling Russians who have since settled there. The Tatar population loyal to Ukraine would also return to their home island without facing any immediate threat of displacement. If Ukraine successfully reacquires Crimea, it will mark a major victory for the country and send shockwaves around Europe about the strategic and military power of Ukraine. This would deliver the worldwide message that Russia no longer possesses a dominating hold over its previous Soviet territories, and signal a massive failure to the reign of Putin. His chapter of Imperial Russia might finally be closed, for good. Russians overall view the 2014 taking of Crimea as Putin's single greatest achievement. If Ukraine took Crimea back, it would be the ultimate blow to Putin's credibility in the eyes of the Russian people. In 2014, Russia took advantage of the weak military power of Ukraine and the chaos in the country due to the sudden exit of then-President Yanukovych. At that time, Russian dominance was a topic of concern. For several years, neither Ukraine itself nor Western powers had attempted any direct challenge or retaliation towards Russia for this. But the final straw was when Russia launched this new special military operation against all of Ukraine in early 2022. Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity will not be forgotten, as Ukraine now refuses to enter into diplomatic talks and is steadfast on acquiring its territories back from Russia, including Crimea. The fate of Crimea still hangs in the balance, as the overall Russian-Ukrainian conflict enters its 10th year. If the war drags out, chances are that Ukraine might launch a full-fledged attack on Crimea to try and claim it back. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly threatened the use of nuclear weapons. Both sides are exercising caution, as the fate of Crimea still remains unclear. Who do you think will gain the upper hand in the coming months? It is now evident that it will be next to impossible for Russia to win the war through force, especially considering how the Ukrainian military demonstrated their upper hand in the final months of 2022, pushing Russian forces out of Kharkiv and forcing them to retreat along the other side of the Dnipro River in Kherson. At the same time, Ukrainian offenses might not be enough to break Russian defenses and reclaim lost territory. It all currently feels like a stalemate, and resilience will likely be what decides the fate of the war. Even in the face of a tough resistance, Putin continues to stress on his demand for Kiev. Decisive victory does not seem to be inevitable for either side in the near future, and it remains to be seen if negotiations can ever be opened again. Amidst this chaos, the Ukrainian people have stood adamantly behind their president, determined not to let go of their independence. Meanwhile, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, increasing numbers of Russian citizens are protesting Putin's war, with forced military drafts becoming common throughout Russia. It may only be a matter of time before Ukrainian will and strength prevails, considering the seemingly entire lack of morale on the Russian fighting front. With any conclusions still feeling quite distant, the West needs to ramp up its support for Ukraine. Only then will the country be successful in pushing the Russians back and forcing Putin's hand in putting an end to the madness. Irrespective of the outcome, one thing is for sure. Ukraine and Russia will never be friendly and will feel threatened by each other for long after this war. Over 90% of Ukrainians believe the war will be won only by recapturing all territory including Crimea. So Crimea is not only strategic, but would be the most symbolic win for Ukraine to be able to assert dominance moving forward in the years to come.